of XM Group live in our Sydney CBD studio. Pete, welcome along to the discussion. Weigh into it if you could. The crude debate with prices falling 3 3/4% to 40.10. That is now in bear market territory. Are you seeing short-term path of least resistance as being further downside, or where to next?
Well, good afternoon, Carson and team. Yeah, it's no doubt 5 weeks, Carson, 22% down. The shorts, I heard your comments earlier. I mean, the hedge funds are all over it. 300 million open positions. They reckon it'll knock it up to about 390 million barrels worth of short positions. So it's certainly growing. There's more chance, I think, of a 38 handle in the short term. I'd say possibly within the next week and a half. And that momentum, we feel, will just continue to the downside. It's hard to pull a floor on it, but at the moment, it's certainly one-way traffic.
So the idea, too, of the performance to date of hedge funds, what is the likely, in position here? Are they proving themselves adept, or are they showing that increasingly, if they're only coming into this now, it could be painful?
Carson, they've had 4 goes at this since the start of 15. Remember, they did it early in 15. They did it towards about the middle to the about this time last year, and they've had 2 cracks at it this year. So their momentum, certainly, they trade it up and down, and at the moment they're saying that there's further downside. Their positions are showing that, and they're putting dollars to play. They're employing that capital. So if you're in leverage and you've had a strong run down, I heard what Mark said, it's been certainly a very, very prosperous 3 to 4 weeks, and I'm sure there'd be a lot of banana chairs sitting on seats at Cannes.
What happens, well, perish the thought, France needs everything, every little it can get right now.
Every dollar.
Let's talk about the S&P 500 index. In July, it was up 3.6%. The price of oil in that time collapsed 14%. Again, we've got this kind of there is no alternative theme to markets, but the fundamentals are telling a different story. Absolutely.
I mean, the S&P, it's had a lovely run up, and it's certainly what we saw on those numbers coming back on Friday night. Gold up $26. Fairly weak second quarter numbers. US dollar tumbled, and that all pushed it up. We expected, from where I was sitting this time last week, I thought you'd be sitting, an early 1300, 1310 numbers were far worse than expected, and it bounced. So it's going to be fascinating in August what happens as far as reporting. There's plenty of companies reporting this week. The big boys as well. So what happens to the S&P by the end of the month? We're only early days, but August is going to be a very interesting month.
You talk about the big boys. Let's talk about Rio Iron Ore and where you see prices heading next, because they seem to be in giddy territory.
Well, they are, and I mean, the base metals have had a little bit of a, push up. I think that, it's going to be, again, markets can gallop ahead of themselves. I've got one way, I've got a blinkered view on this. I'm just seeing where oil's going to take us. I'm certainly conscious of what the copper situation is, and the nickels and aluminium and all of that, and of course iron ore. But I've got a very close eye on where oil trades, and if it drops below that 38, 38.50, I think it'll drag a few others down with it.
You think Rio, for its part, what's it going to be talking and telling us more about costs? Have you got a view there, in terms of the capex, the general costs likely falling?
I don't think anything's changed, Carson. From you look at all the big miners and roll your eyes across it, from the BHPs and, of course, BP, all of them are cutting headcount. And it seems to be the only way that they can look at any form of, return on shareholder value at the present time.
Goldman Sachs is saying that the stock levels in China on iron ore are running at record lows. Are you believing this? It's hard to square that one.
Well, exactly. I mean, if they're running at record lows, they must be doing a lot of construction. I mean, have a look what's being sent out from the Pilbara each day. It's nearly at record highs, and of course from Vale out of Brazil. So there's obviously a lot of construction going on there, a lot of ore being turned to steel, and it's being employed somewhere. There's a lot of vacant ships in the world. Maybe they're building a lot of ships with that steel. As far as construction's going on, well, we've got our own. We can believe the numbers, and then again we can believe the numbers.
Hey, sorry.
Yeah. So is the investor getting into the mix with the iron ore pricing at the moment? Because I know the steel mills have upped the ante in terms of production, but the next question is, where's that steel going once it's been produced? And in terms of the US and other countries, they're starting to put prohibitive tariffs on Chinese steel imports. So they're obviously seeing a bit too much of that product coming their way.
Well, of course, and that's exactly right. And I think that will probably play in. I mean, let's listen to what Mr. Trump has to say. And as it gets closer and closer, I'm sure he's going to be very conscious of those large tariffs and so on. So it's in his eyes, it's an uncompetitive landscape. We've touched on that briefly before, and I think that will continue over the months ahead. Everyone's got their own views as far as China and their forms as, do you believe the numbers? And again, it's a difficult one to measure.
It's very interesting, the retort now that's come from Warren Buffett on Trump, ripping into him over his refusal to release tax returns, his business bankruptcies, his attacks on a fallen soldier's family, saying, sort of from the McCarthy era, have you no sense of decency, sir?
And he's challenged him to put out both their tax returns at the same time and have a conference, have a meeting, and anyone can ask them any questions they like about their...
That'd be a very interesting panel discussion, wouldn't it? Great for someone to moderate.
If Channel 7 had the rights to that, their shares would go up.
Yeah, they might well do.
Pete, just a question on you sounded a little bit exasperated. So for the viewers that might be watching, in terms of where would you point them to watch? Is it they have to watch everything? You mentioned copper, iron ore, oil. Where would you say that the real pressure point is? Is it around the idea that oil and hedge funds, and is that what you would ask them to watch?
Yeah.
Is that the one? And then everything will drag with it? Or do you say, you know what, this is just the zero-rate world? They're all very dynamic at the moment.
Well, it's a zero-rate world. We're very conscious of that. I'm looking forward to seeing the numbers coming out on Friday night for non-farm payrolls. There's the first part, Mark. The second one, of course, is if this market continues to hemorrhage, we're down 22% in 5 weeks. If that continues to the downside for crude, then I think it's going to be wonderful if our dollar holds where it is. It's had very little movement today, and we haven't discussed even that. But if we're sitting here and crude and energy prices come lower, it's going to be great for the Australian consumer. The second part is if the market falls back and that's seasonally adjusted and all of those sort of inputs come into the market, refineries and so on, we could be sitting here at a $35 crude in September, rubbing our hands together and going, how good's this? So I think we've got to keep an eye on it.
On the dollar, you have to say, would you not, market pricing had pretty much shifted in the direction. It was a 71% going into the decision expectation on the cuts. So we got the cut. Had we not got the cut, I put to you, that would have been the more seismic move to the upside, and what a test of 78.
Well, exactly right. I mean, look, there's bears out there saying, Carson, 68 to 71, we're going to see that tested to the downside. I'm not necessarily sure of that, considering Yellen and what we saw on Friday night. So I think that the US has got a handbrake on it as far as any form of rate rise in the short to medium term. It's an election. There's so many
unknowns.
Variables.
Known unknowns.
Known unknowns, and unknown unknowns.
Yeah. All right. On that basis, on that very Rumsfeldian end to your cross, we thank you very much.